This is a creature commonly known as either an armored root terror or a metal keula. For simplicity, I will be using the latter term. They are a unique enemy in Remnant 2 that is covered in armor that reduces all incoming damage by 90%, and the intended way to kill them is by waiting for them to throw out their heart, which acts as the creature's weak spot players can attack for normal damage. However, upon landing the final blow, this huge damage number inexplicably appears alongside the original damage dealt. I consider this interaction Remnant 2's greatest mystery, because per video evidence from Sultanas, it has been in the game since its release date and yet there is no documentation of it. It's not listed on either wiki, and the only acknowledgement I could find of it existing is a single Reddit post showing off the potential damage. It seems like the player base has simply accepted it exists and never looked further into it. As a collector of obscure and unorthodox knowledge, I simply could not resist trying to find an answer for how it works, and as a consequence, I am now probably the most knowledgeable person on Remnant 2's damage calculations outside of the developers themselves. Given there's currently no official name, allow me to tell you all about what I've decided to call the Heartburn Glitch. I'll start out by providing an explanation for why the Heartburn Glitch occurs in the first place. And to do so, we need to view Metal Keula's actions from a mechanical standpoint. What players see is Metal Keula throwing its heart and that heart becoming the weak spot to attack. What actually happens is the creature spawns a projectile that aims for the player's location, and upon landing on a valid surface spawns a new entity that resembles the thrown heart, setting its max HP to be equal to Metal Keula's current HP. Being separate creatures ends up creating three unique interactions that explain how the glitch works. The first is that while damaging the heart hurts Metal Keula, hurting Metal Keula does not damage the heart. By using Beta Ray to instantly damage the body as the heart lands, you can create a desync between the two health bars, and after attacking the heart some more, this happens. As you saw, the Heartburn Glitch is not caused by killing the heart. But contrary to what you're probably expecting, it's also not caused by Metal Keula's death. For reasons I'll explain in the calculations, certain weapons do less damage to Metal Keula than they do to the heart, one of these being Deceit. By dealing lethal damage to the heart with this weapon, Heartburn triggers with a value half the original hit's damage, and Metal Keula remains alive. Therefore, the Heartburn Glitch activation condition is the heart taking an amount of damage that the game believes should be lethal to the body. More importantly, this means that the Heartburn number isn't just visual, it's the actual damage Metal Keula took from that attack. But if that's the case, why does it only happen on the final hit? The answer to that lies with the Repulsor. This long gun is equipped with a unique mod called Banish, which has the initial effect of freezing targets it hits and making them immune to damage until it wears off. If you apply the effect to Metal Keula while the heart is out, you'll find that attacking the heart will still cause damage to the body while it's banished. That is, right up until that damage is lethal, at which point Metal Keula stops being hurt. Doesn't matter the method or if you had a heart-body desync, the creature cannot be killed this way while banish remains in effect. With this knowledge, here's my best explanation for what's happening internally, written as C++ code. Upon the heart spawning, it gets passed data on the summoner's ID value and current HP, setting the latter to be its own maximum HP. When hit, the heart has its HP reduced and records the amount of damage taken. This value gets compared to its summoner's current HP, and if Metal Keula's HP would not be reduced to 0 by subtracting the damage amount, the game directly sets its HP to the new value specifically to avoid duplicate damage numbers. However, this setting method doesn't account for what to do when Metal Keula's HP becomes negative, so to avoid having to write duplicate code, the developers made it where if the heart detects that the amount of damage it took would be lethal to the body, instead of setting the value like before, the damage is dealt as a direct attack against the body. This would explain why the number appears, and the unusually high value is likely the result of being run through the damage calculator a second time. At least, I wish it were that straightforward. When I started researching the Heartburn Glitch's damage calculation, I'd assumed it would be a simple formula shared across all attacks that I could have solved in a few days of research. Instead, over the past 4 months, I ended up having to test every possible attack in the game due to how convoluted most of the formulas became. Because of the sheer amount of data I have to go through, the rest of this video is going to be a shortened explanation of how the calculations function, highlighting any particularly interesting findings, and offering some theories for why certain formulas work the way that they do. Yes, this is the shortened version. The full documentation I turned into a Google spreadsheet, listing every attack, what formula and subtype they use, and I even included fully operational calculators for verifying your results, tested to be accurate for all but exceedingly high values due to rounding errors. This will be linked in the pinned comment. Though some of you might be interested in my explanations, I know many others probably just want the numbers and no longer have a reason to watch. So, per content creator tradition, I will provide incentive to stay by offering information about another powerful glitch I discovered somewhere in the following section. Whether you decide to stay or not, I'll still say thank you for listening up till now. I shall begin my explanations with the base formula, which is used by the majority of player attacks. The normal damage formula generally works by multiplying base damage by damage bonus, weak spot, and critical values. A max upgrade Widowmaker, for example, with 25% damage bonus is 450 times 1.25 times 2.2 for the weak spot, gives us 1237.5, displaying 1237 due to weird rounding. Using this input, the Heartburn damage from this attack ends up being 23,141. To reach this value, we first apply the Heartburn multiplier, which in the simplified version is just the previous damage percentage times 2. Then you multiply it by original weak spot value again, then 1 plus double the weak spot bonus, in this case 3.4. Put it together and we get our answer. Critical bonuses function identically to the weak spot portion, with 2 regulars and a doubled. And now it's time to face the consequences of damaging 2 creatures at once. See, every part of this formula contains a heart damage portion and a body damage portion for bonuses that only affect that specific target. Critical damage is the simplest to explain, as the first 2 critical multipliers only apply if the input damage rolled a critical hit, and the doubled version is added if the Heartburn damage itself rolled a critical hit. In the case of the Heartburn multiplier, rather than simply doubling the damage bonus, a better representation of the value would be like this, where bonuses from things like exposed and corroded status can make one part take more damage than the other. Heartburn weak spot is a bit trickier to explain. The first 2 are specific to the heart, and the doubled one is represented as 1 plus the sum of body weak spot times the number of weak spots hit. The way I figured it out was through testing using the corrupted deceit and its tainted blood mechanic. It's also not entirely accurate since there's also heart and body bonus weak spot through the floodlit diamond, and these are accounted for like so. This was just the simplest way I could write it in a way that I could make a calculator out of the formula, so it's what I'm sticking with. The final part of the formula is damage multipliers, and these fall into 4 categories. Optionals are multipliers that can be applied to the body, heart, or both at once. Bright stones are a good example of this, and the general rule is that heart multipliers apply to both input and heartburn, while body multipliers only apply to the heartburn, and all of them stack with each other multiplicatively. Some multipliers always apply to both, such as the Onyx Pendulum, and some multipliers are body part specific, such as the 15% fire weakness of Metal Kaula, which the heart does not share with it. There's also a few multipliers that are specific to the input damage as a result of the attack's inherent mechanics. An easy example is how the Eruption skill increases in damage based on the number of status effects on a target. The Master Killer legendary trait is a slight exception to all these rules, as it applies once to the input and heart weak spot values, then twice to the body weak spot value. Heartburn weak spot, crit, and extra multipliers generally function the same across any Heartburn calculation. What makes each formula different is how they handle the input damage and primary Heartburn multiplier, along with each one having exclusive multipliers and outliers to the category that, while notably different, aren't unique enough to be their own specific formula. The base formula itself has 4 special multipliers that were common enough I decided to count them as their own subcategories. The first of these are pellet weapons. The heart portion of these weapons gets a multiplier of the number of pellets that connect with it divided by the total number of pellets fired. Then, because it seems like the body can't detect bullet modifiers, it always gets a multiplier of 1 divided by the total pellets. As a result, The best case scenario will always result in a pellet weapon's damage being divided by its total number of pellets. Split shot weapons, which consist of only Deceit and Redeemer, essentially work the same as pellet weapons, but since they are incapable of landing multiple bullets in a single damage number, they perform significantly worse. You might expect that Corrupted Fellion does the opposite since it fires 3 projectiles that share the original base damage, but it simply uses the default formula. Next is charge attacks, consisting of bows, charge rifles, and melee heavy attacks. Melee chain attacks are technically the 4th category, but they function identically to this one. In both cases, the charge damage is applied as only a heart multiplier, which fits my theory with pellet weapons that the body can't detect shot modifications. Except there are 2 exceptions to this, Savior and Monorail, who also have it applied as a body multiplier. And yes, that does mean that for Monorail, its Heartburn gets a 729 times multiplier to base damage at full charge, prior to including any other damage buffs, since it clearly wasn't powerful enough. Speaking of charge attacks, it's about time I told you about that secret glitch. This glitch has to do with the Force Multiplier, a ring that is generally considered very weak, and despite being a charge weapon, Monorail gains no benefit from it at all. What I discovered is that after firing a charged weapon with the Force Multiplier's effect active, that damage bonus isn't removed until you fire your gun, use a ranged mod that fires a projectile, or remove the ring. And that bonus is applied to every other attack you deal directly. This makes it a top pick for melee, status, and skill builds who do not make use of a charged weapon naturally. Apart from the main 4 subtypes, there's a few more special mentions to cover before moving on. Anguish is a combination between a pellet and a charge attack weapon, and simply uses a mashup of both formulas, though it acts like a split shot weapon for the uncharged fire mode. What's actually strange about it is that regardless of how long you hold the charged shot, Force Multiplier caps out at a 1.15 multiplier for no clear reason. Quick Draw and the Engineer's turrets when carried have a body multiplier based on your player's power level, reaching 9 times damage at level 20. I'm guessing this is because the player specifically wields them like their weapons. Quick Draw's Charge Shot is also an all-type multiplier, and combined with the power level value, creates the highest base multiplier to its Heartburn of 1944. Not to mention it also guarantees a crit on both targets. Force Stomp and Blood Draw's pullback portion strangely have their Heartburn affected by Metal Keula's armor, meaning they both get a 0.1 body multiplier applied to them. These are the only 2 attacks that it happens with directly, but it can also occur if you hit the heart with a melee attack while it is stuck to you. My best guess is it happens if the heart somehow detects an attack from underneath its connection point, as shooting the heart like this doesn't seem to have the same issue. Voidlight's direct explosion and projectile formulas are essentially opposites. Their only similarity is the input multiplier resulting from their mechanic where attacking the orb increases damage dealt. The projectiles gain an input divider based on the number of targets it aims for, while the direct explosion is able to deal weak spot damage to the heart. They also both get their own additional input multiplier from damage bonuses. For the direct portion, it benefits from increases in all mod and explosive damage bonuses, specifically excluding physical damage bonuses, which it uses in the first multiplier and Heartburn multiplier. Conversely, the projectile attacks multiplier only benefits from all damage bonuses. The Heartburn only cares about mod damage, and along with not being considered explosive, it doesn't benefit from physical or elemental damage increases either. There are a few other attacks that share similar strange behavior, and I'll point these out as I go. Finally, the Ball mod does not actually have a base weak spot, but instead adds 50% to every weak spot instance. I theorize this might be due to how the mod is used to create weak spots, and perhaps doing it the normal way resulted in attacks that hit Ball's weak spot gaining the mod's share of weak spot damage as well. This concludes the section on the base formula. Let me reassure you, the rest of the formulas are going to go a lot quicker than this one. The next variation I like to call the quad formula, due to the fact that without boosts, the Heartburn damage of these attacks is 4 times the input damage. It consists of only ranged weapon mods, though not all ranged weapon mods use this formula. How these work is that base damage, bonus damage from the damage multiplier, and then all other damage is split into 3 separate Heartburn multipliers. The differences are that base and bonus have a 2 added to them, and base damage uses body damage twice rather than one heart and one body like usual. My guess for why a 2 is added is that because these are ranged weapon mods, they're including the base weapon's damage as well. Since the base weapon doesn't use mod damage, this becomes a 1 and then doubled to 2 by the Heartburn multiplier. This might also explain why base damage uses body twice, but I'm less certain on that one. Of special note here are 2 weapons. Hellfire's explosive shot has the all damage input multiplier like Void Light, but treats explosive damage normally. On the other hand, Monarch's Chain of Command explosion specifically treats explosive damage boosts as a separate multiplier, even getting its own Heartburn calculation for it. These are completely unique behaviors as every other attack seems to treat explosive damage as a type of all damage increase. And now it's time to introduce most players to an entirely new mechanic, false weak spots. There are a total of 13 attacks where damaging a weak spot with Burden of the Gambler equipped still results in bonus damage being dealt. These are separated into 2 camps, scaling and non-scaling, based on whether they are affected by general damage increases. Scaling false weak spots are really easy. All you do is multiply the full formula by its false weak spot twice normally, but only once if you have Burden of the Gambler in effect. Non-scaling false weak spots are quite different. Only base damage gets the +2 to its Heartburn multiplier, and rather than damage boosts being added to said multiplier, they instead get added to the false weak spot multiplier at their original value, or half value in the case of heart and body damage. With Burden of the Gambler equipped, this formula sets the Heartburn multiplier of the other damage category to 1 and subtracts 1 from the row's false weak spot multiplier. The false weak spot for base and bonus is completely unchanged, which is weird given that all rows are affected in the scaling version. There are 3 items of note in this category. Chaos Driver doesn't have the extra 2 added to its base multiplier, and its extra rods and external rod multipliers are all input only, stacking with each other multiplicatively. Astral Burst has an incorrect description for its damage buff from bouncing the projectiles. Though it says it provides +10 additional damage per bounce, it's actually a multiplier that does +25% per bounce, maxing out at 1.75 times original damage at the final bounce. This is treated as a heart multiplier by the Heartburn formula. The part about lower weak spot damage is also complete nonsense since it gains the full benefit of weak spot damage increases, and its false weak spot is the highest among all attacks, being an 85% increase instead of the usual 50%. Bloodline is another tricky formula, as the mod innately gets a 1.5 damage multiplier for every target it passes through. What creates a problem is that the body treats hitting the heart as having pierced one target, and adding even more targets makes the problem even worse. Heartburn handles this with the following formula, with the base damage using a 0.25 in the second part instead of a 0.5 to account for the heart being pierced one less time than the body. The next 3 mods, Will of the Wisp, Fusion Cannon, and Nanoswarm, all have a weird multiplier in common. For some reason, they all get an upgrade-based multiplier that maxes out at 9 like skill weapons. What makes them especially weird is that the formula uses the unupgraded damage value for the base and bonus section, and all other damage from upgrading gets treated as other damage. Will of the Wisp works off the original quad formula for its Heartburn with no other modifications. Fusion Cannon is a scaling weak spot type, so you multiply by 1.5 twice, or once with Gambler equipped. This is also one of 2 mods that use multiple charges at once, and in this case you just adjust the input damage to account for the additional damage per charge, being 125 per level. Meanwhile, Nanoswarm works off a non-scaling false weak spot, and its functionality is a huge mess. Unlike the previous 2 formulas, damage from upgrades gets added to the bonus damage column, and the unupgraded damage has its share of the false weak spot added to an entirely separate row. Then when you wear Burden of the Gambler, both false weak spot columns have their Heartburn multiplier set to 1 as expected, but only the other damage column has its false weak spot multiplier altered. And unlike every other case where you subtract the 1, it instead decides to subtract its false weak spot value. These 3 together took me almost a month to figure out, and I've still got no idea what common factor they might share to give them this upgrade-based multiplier. Status damage is a simple one since it functions almost identically to the base formula. Burning gets a 1.15 multiplier for being fire damage, Bleed gets a 0.9, Overload has an input multiplier of plus 10% per nearby overloaded target, and corrosion adds 10% heart damage. However, even though it doesn't improve the input damage, the heartburn damage is multiplied by 1 plus the duration bonus squared. With Timekeeper Jewel and Affliction maxed out, that becomes a 16 times multiplier for all status effects, and with only Banner the Fanatic, which reduces it to 50%, it becomes a 0.25 times multiplier. Other multipliers work like past examples, but Vial, Creeping Mist, and Stormbringer's multipliers are all additive with each other. There's also an additional multiplier for Bleed, Burn, and Corrosion, where if you manage to get a status duration that isn't a multiple of 0.5, the game rounds the number of damage ticks to the nearest one and applies an input multiplier of the original duration divided by the rounded duration. Of particular note is the burning from Hellfire's explosive shot, which, like the mod, gets multiplied by all damage bonuses. Then, because Nanoswarm's direct damage wasn't confusing enough, not only does the status damage have the upgrade multiplier, the input damage itself has a special formula. So the mod says 150 acid damage over 5 seconds at max upgrade, which should equal 15 per tick. But in actuality, the status damage is the listed value multiplied by the sum of 1.6 plus 0.2 times the upgrade level plus 0.6 times the status duration bonus, resulting in a base value of 54 damage per tick. With its Heartburn formula, you add 3 to the base damage because it's the unupgraded damage of 5 multiplied by 0.6, then multiply it using the usual formula and upgrade level multiplier. All the other bonus multipliers work like normal, except for the duration rounding, where the input damage's duration bonus value will use the rounded value instead of the original. Why is it programmed like this? My guess is it's something from an older patch where the mod used to do more damage, but it feels too specific to be accidental. Next up are summons, and they are probably the most misrepresented attack type, being simultaneously much stronger and weaker than players think. Stronger because all summons save 1, treat mod, summon, and heart damage as one multiplier, and all explosive and skill damage as another. Mod summons double the first and multiply by the second in their Heartburn multiplier, while skill summons do the reverse. Weaker because summons are completely unaffected by all weak spot, crit damage, and crit chance boosts, and the majority of heart and body damage boosters like Singed Ring have no effect on summon damage. Exposed still works, as does Ritualist's damage perk, as long as the status effect you applied wasn't slow. Bonuses specific to the summon, such as how the Atari booster says it increases turret critical chance, might have an effect, but I don't have a good way of actually confirming. On top of these special traits, almost every single summon has something unique about their particular damage formula. For mods, Space Crabs treats mod damage as a separate multiplier, while Fargazer gains no benefit at all. Neither utilize the stat in the Heartburn multiplier though. Rootlash has both a non-scaling false weak spot and a true weak spot, and its formula closely resembles the non-scaling quad formula, except that base and bonus are combined, and false weak spot has its own specific column. When you have Gambler equipped, the false weak spot's default value is either multiplied by itself or divided by 2. I'm not sure which it is given the way other formulas have operated, but the end result is that the value gets halved. Familiar introduces a completely new formula I call the half formula, where you generally only benefit from the heart multipliers once, and you have to split heart and body damage between visible and invisible respectively. Perhaps not the most accurate way to do it, but it works with the calculators. Nightguard is the only mod summon without any unique trait, which I suppose as a consequence is what makes it unique. Summoner's minion attacks and Handler's Dog use the skill-based equivalent of it, though both also have a heart multiplier applied that reduces damage based on the attack the creature performs, such as the dog's double bite having a 0.6 times multiplier. Formula aside for a moment, both archetypes have very misleading stat screens, as every single boost that increases your creature's damage actually provides double the amount as summon damage. Attack Dog's Howl in particular actually grants players 20% all damage, while both mod and skill summons get a 40% summon damage increase. With Summoner's Sacrifice mechanics, the initial explosion follows the same formula as regular attacks with an additional distance-based reduction as a heart multiplier. They also have an input-only health-based damage reduction. I don't know its exact numbers, but it seems to cap out at a 50% damage reduction when the creature has 30% HP or lower. Flyer's sacrifice projectiles are a bit odd in that they only benefit from half the value of summon, heart, and body damage bonuses. It also starts with a 1.5 in the Heartburn multiplier for some reason. Reaver's cluster bombs, on the other hand, aren't summon damage at all. They are purely skill damage and thus able to benefit from weak spot and critical bonuses. Its Heartburn is almost identical to the base formula, but it still keeps the health-based damage reduction. Also worth noting is neither it or its initial explosion have a distance-based damage reduction, setting it apart from the other sacrifice explosions. Only other attack to note is that Reaver's armor throw doesn't benefit from skill damage increases. Most likely, this is just an oversight. Then we have the Nerudian tech summons. Attack drone's bullets follow the same pattern as the dog and minion attacks, with the addition of the power level multiplier from skill weapons. Where it gets interesting is with its missiles, as they gain their damage by adding 500% heart damage, resulting in the Heartburn multiplier halving it to 250% in its calculation. It's a really odd choice for it to not be a multiplier, since it makes summon and other heart damage sources provide very little benefit to the main attack. The Vulcan and Flamethrower turret modes also have the power level multiplier, just like their handheld versions, but they also have them divided by 4 and 1.5625 respectively. I guess this might have something to do with fire rate, but this is one of the few things I can't provide an adequate explanation for. Impact Cannon and the turret's melee attack actually both use the half formula, with the key difference being that Impact Cannon treats heart damage multiplicatively, and the turret melee treats it as additively. Both also have their power level multiplier divided by 3. Surprisingly, placing the turret also counts as an attack, and uses a formula that resembles the general summon formula, the only difference being its Heartburn multiplier doesn't get doubled like usual. Likewise, Way of Lydusa, Wellspring, Redemption, Juggernaut, and Rampage also do small amounts of damage on activation, as well as when Rampage reaches maximum stacks. Summoners sacrifice too, but only if you're sacrificing a flyer for some reason. All of them use the default base formula, except for Way of Lydusa's hit, which has the same halved Heartburn as the turret placement formula. It should be evident that I was very thorough with my testing, and among all the formulas I created, there are a few weapons that I am incapable of providing a Heartburn formula for. Horizon Strike, Fission Strike, Chaos Driver's laser connections, Cube Shield, and Ouroboros' charge attack blade throw cannot damage the heart at all, even if it passes right through it. I also tested the special attacks from Boss Rush, but almost all of them either cannot damage the heart, or they cannot target the heart with their attacks. The only exception is Detonate, which I think uses the base formula, but I'm not certain due to how that skill functions. With those out of the way, we're down to the last 7 attacks, each having formulas unique enough to be in their own category. Big Bang treats its multiple charges as a multiplier along with the small multiplier listed in its description. It's not quite a simple heart and body multiplier though, as part of it gets directly applied to the Heartburn multiplier prior to the +2 from the weapon. While Dead Point's explosions use the quad formula, the direct hit actually uses a strange version of the half formula from the turret melee, where everything prior to the +2 is divided by 4. It only uses heart damage for the first 3 Heartburn multipliers, and unlike the other half formula attacks, is able to benefit from heart crit twice rather than once. I get the division by 4, but the rest of it is truly bizarre. Explosive Shot is back for the 3rd time, as it has a formula specifically for the direct impact of the Explosive Shot. The base damage for this is the explosion's damage times 0.105, resulting in 55.125 at max upgrade. The rest of the calculation works like the default formula, but the raw input damage gets a multiplier of 1.105, while all other sources of damage get a 0.105 multiplier. And like the other parts, this too has the extra all damage multiplier. Soulbinder's AoE attack simply applies its 0.6 damage multiplier twice to the amount of damage the bound target received. Increasing the input damage makes it stronger, but you can also boost the Soulbinder's damage through heart and body damage increases. You'd think this means Brightstone would boost the damage too, but it only affects the input damage for some reason. Die Hard is a skill most players may forget deals damage, and it's very weird. It does a fixed 200 base damage regardless of archetype or power level, and it doesn't scale with skill damage at all, because it scales with mod damage instead. I guess it went unnoticed since players don't go out of their way to use this as an attack. The Heartburn multiplier is actually identical to the normal damage multiplier, apart from heart and body damage providing only half benefit. Then the entire thing gets multiplied by 4/3, which I believe is some sort of motion value since dividing 200 by that value results in 150. The same base damage as Warstomp at minimum power level. Saviour's functionality with Shatterstar is very unique. One thing players might not realize is that while this mod or any of the elemental bullet mods are active, the primary fire actually benefits from mod damage increases, being additive with ranged damage. As for the Heartburn formula, on a direct hit, the big damage follows the normal charge formula. But that second value isn't the input damage, it is instead a fragment hit, which has its own bizarre damage formula that completely ignores body damage increases. The weak spot and critical bonuses of the body weak spot portion are combined additively, bonus damage doesn't benefit from said body weak spot, and you multiply the whole thing by additional weak spot bonuses not resulting from the weapon. If you instead kill with the Shatterstar fragment, you multiply the base damage by weak spot and crit added together, and bonus damage gets the Heartburn multiplier. It also ignores damage boosts applied specifically to the original target. Weird as it is, I can at least understand how it got to these values in the formula. I can't say the same for Prismatic Driver's Explosion. This monstrosity is 9 segments of a false weak spot hybrid between scaling and non-scaling, and weak spot is included in the Heartburn multiplier for some reason, except for the true weak spot portion of damage, and to top it all off, base false weak spot specifically gets an extra 1.5 multiplier just because it feels special. I have no clue why any of this is the way that it is. I only solved it by throwing semi-random values into the formula and somehow made it so the calculator provided accurate answers. I am thankful it is the only attack like this, because having to solve it a second time probably would have caused me to terminate my own operating system. I hate looking at that thing, so here's the calculation in practice. Have fun confirming it's accurate. I need a moment. And with that, we're done. That is the primary formula for every attack in the game covered. Now you also know how the Heartburn Glitch works and can ask a question I should have asked when I started. How is this in any way useful? Well, I suppose it did teach us not to use shotguns or anything with a damage reducing multiplier, unless we like prolonging the fight with Metal Kaula. Mostly it's just really interesting, and despite the constant frustration, it was quite fun to figure it all out. I suppose there's one more use, but I'm gonna have to save that for a separate video. I expect I'm probably talking to myself at this point anyway, but if you're still listening, thanks for watching. I'd be glad if anyone out there has as much interest in the obscure and unorthodox as I do. After 4 months of non-stop research though, I need a little time to recharge and keep myself operational. But once I return, I have plenty more videos on Remnant 2 to work on, along with some other games I partake in. Until that time though, be on your way.